Here are 3 seemingly normal pictures with very dark backstories. Number 1. The Whitaker family. What looks like maybe just a normal family out to dinner, this was actually the same night that Bart Whitaker had hired 2 friends to come and kill his entire family. Plotting to do so for monetary gain, the only survivor of the hit was the father, who is not pictured here as he was the one taking this photo. Number 2. Green boots. Maybe this looks like just a snow hiker taking a break or a nap, but it's actually one of the hundreds of bodies that remain on Mount Everest as the conditions are impossible to retrieve them. Because they are left, they remain only as landmarks for future hikers. Number 3. Carl Tanzler's doll. Maybe this looks like a poor rendition of a wax figure, but it's actually the corpse of Elena Hoyos. Following her death in her 20s, a man named Carl Tanzler became obsessed with her and ended up stealing and taxidermying her body, where it remained in his home and bed for 10 years. Do you notice something kind of off about this mannequin? For anyone who's familiar with the legend, she is known as La Pascualita. The mannequin has stood in the window of a Mexican bridal shop for more than 90 years, but when she was first placed there, patrons noticed something kind of strange. The detail work on this mannequin was unusual. She was noted with eyebrow hair, veins, and even discoloration around her mouth and ears. But that suspicion soon grew to horror as patrons started to notice that she bore a striking resemblance to the owner's deceased daughter, Pascuala. Pascuala was actually said to be married herself, but ended up dying in a tragedy before her wedding day. Shortly after her death, the mannequin appeared in the window and the legend was born that these were the preserved remains of the owner's daughter. But the most compelling evidence has always been the hands. The hands are shown with wrinkles, they have veins, they even have lifelike fingernails, which is unlike any mannequin I have ever seen. The question remains to this day, could this really be the shop owner's daughter? Have you ever experienced the fear of a shark attack? I think most people are pretty aware of just how rare that occurrence actually is. But the mysterious case of Michelle Emster is one that bewilders investigators. The morning of April 15th, 1994, her body was discovered washed up on the shore of a San Diego beach. Found completely nude, her body had suffered severe injuries, including a missing leg, broken bones, and unexplained bite marks. The medical examiner rules that this was due to a shark attack, but marine experts come forward to argue the statistical improbability and note that her injuries were not consistent with that. It was also noted that prior to her death, Michelle had made several complaints to colleagues of an unknown man she claimed was stalking her, but he was never identified. The night she died, she was reported to have been dropped off at the beach, but it was unknown why she would go there alone or why she would go swimming in such cold waters if she even did. Her clothing was never recovered, but her purse was found placed far from the body. Although it was ruled accidental, the circumstances are still strange. What is it that the rich and elite all have in common? Musicians, world business leaders, even US presidents. They all attend the Bohemian Grove. But before I get into this video, if you want a full-length video on the Bohemian Grove, I'm going to post one to my YouTube. If you want to subscribe, the link is in the bio. Okay, so the Bohemian Grove refers to a secretive members-only retreat that hosts a yearly gathering in the woods of California. This secret society is exclusive to only men and has been in existence since 1872. During the encampment, the events that take place are kept hidden from the public and outside photography is strictly forbidden. However, there have been various photos and videos that have leaked through the years showing unusual gatherings and unexplained rituals. The grounds are protected by a year-round security team and very few outsiders have ever been able to get inside. The mystery of these rituals is one that perplexes the outside world. So why do the richest men of the world partake in the Bohemian Grove? There is no way that you didn't see a trailer for this back in 2019. The Curse of La Llorona was one of the highest grossing horror films of the entire year. The film capitalized on the Latin American legend of the woman who drowned her children and then herself in a fit of rage when she found that her husband was seeing another woman. According to the folklore, she was trapped in a state of purgatory, just doomed to roam the earth as she wept while she would look for children she could steal to replace her own. Although the legend of her ghost is known throughout various parts of Latin America, it is very deeply rooted in Mexican culture, the story often being told to children as a way to encourage them not to wander off in the dark or she'll come for them. Throughout the years, the mystery around this legend has been popularized time and time again, and there are many people who have claimed to see, hear, or even capture her on film. For those who grew up hearing the legend of La Llorona, the fear of seeing her at night is very much real. Also, if you are loving Creep Time, make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel with the link in the bio. What's the first thing that you think when looking at these pictures? For anybody who has childhood memories of Televisa and Channel 5, this was part of a nightly broadcast as a PSA to show missing people throughout the late 90s. But this is the photo that caught everyone's attention, Celine Delgado. Audiences noticed there was something kind of off about her. The photo wasn't like the others. It was grainy, it was black and white, and there was seemingly almost no information on her. An inquiry into the public files of Mexico City found that there was no record of a missing woman who was named Celine Delgado. So why was Channel 5 running an image of a woman who wasn't missing? Sleuths Online did a composite cross-comparison where her image was uploaded to a 3D modeling program and proven that it was an amalgamation of other images and that she wasn't a real person. But why? Things remained pretty quiet until that of late 2019 when Channel 5 began posting strange content without explanation. Every night around 3 a.m. there were a series of disturbing video clips that were posted to their public-facing Twitter account and then immediately deleted. But there was one video in particular that reignited the eerie feelings around Delgado. This video, entitled Celine. In it can be seen a distorted compilation of clips around an unknown woman, and then it was deleted immediately after posting. But truthfully, from a rational perspective, I could chalk this story up to any number of explanations. It could be hoaxes, it could be hackings, it could even be marketing. But the really strange part to me is why they would intentionally choose to show an image of a woman who didn't exist, and do so quietly for so many years. This is True Crime by State. Today we are starting with Alabama. I'd completely forgotten this story took place in Alabama at all. It is insane. This is the case of Dr. Amy Bishop. Dr. Bishop was a highly credentialed Harvard graduate who went on to be a biology professor at the University of Alabama. She was known to be standoffish. She had a lot of difficulty socializing with other colleagues in the department. She also had an incredibly dark past. When she was 15, she accidentally shot and killed her brother in their home with a family rifle during an argument. But following that acquittal, let's move forward a good number of years. This is February 12th, 2010. She had just been denied tenure at the university, and this would be her last semester. She was effectively non-renewed. She was fired. So on that February morning, Dr. Bishop teaches 2 classes for biology and then goes to attend a faculty meeting. So everyone is sitting at a conference table, and about 40 minutes into the meeting, she stands up in silence, turns to her side, and fires a 9mm execution style around the room. 3 of those professors are killed instantly, 3 more are wounded, and at some point her gun stalls, which gives them an opportunity to wrestle her, and they get her out of the room and they lock her out. Bishop is apprehended very quickly, and she's in complete denial of what she just did. She doesn't even understand that people are dead. She can't accept it. She was later charged with capital murder and narrowly escaped prosecution for the death penalty under a plea deal. The case of Dr. Bishop has haunted the university for years as to how someone who was capable of such atrocities was seemingly able to fly under the radar as more than just normal, but actually exceptional in academia. This is True Crime by State. Today we are covering Alaska. I went through a lot of cases for Alaska, but there was nothing that compared to Robert Hansen. Outwardly, Robert was a pretty successful person living in Alaska throughout the 70s and 80s. He owned a bakery, he had his own home, he even had a small private plane, and was a pretty accomplished hunter. But Robert had a dark past. He grew up with severe acne and a horrible stutter, and was often the subject of ridicule and rejection from the girls he liked. But in his twisted mind, that rejection bred a lifelong justification for revenge. It was routine for Robert to abduct young women in his car and then bring them home where they were tortured and assaulted. He'd then fly them on his private plane to a remote location to then release and hunt them through the woods as if it was sport. But it all changed with Cindy Paulson. When Cindy was captured, she was tortured and then handcuffed, and then she was brought to board his plane. While he was in and out of the car while loading the cockpit of the plane, she saw her chance. He had left the door unlocked. She kicks off her shoes to leave them in the car as evidence, sneaks out the driver's side, and makes a run for it. She gets away, but when found by police, they start to discredit her accusations because she's a sex worker and he's a well-liked community member, and they don't want to believe her. But she had specific knowledge of the plane and this hunting ritual, which matched an already open investigation, so they approved a search warrant. This uncovered almost all of the evidence they needed to link him to numerous bodies that were found on those hunting grounds. His sentencing would keep him in prison for the rest of his days. But if it hadn't been for Cindy, there's no knowing how long he would have gone on killing. I'm going to show you a picture that you've probably seen before, but maybe don't want to again. The Dream Man. In 2008, this drawing was published and everybody saw it. It was accompanied with the tagline, "Have you seen this man?" The implication being that this was a familiar person to everyone that they had seen in their dreams, but it wasn't somebody they'd seen in real life. The photo gained a real sense of momentum by 2009 and was traced back to marketer Andrea Natella. Let's first note that this was released as a hoax. This is part of what Andrea does. He leans heavily into shock value tactics for marketing, and clearly it was very successful because it reached a lot of people. But even though it was debunked as just marketing, Why was the image successful? Why were there so many people that had believed that they'd seen this man before, at least enough for it to go viral? One theory leans heavily into Jungian archetypes, which suggests we have a sort of preset collective unconsciousness that we can recognize and feel familiar around certain archetypal faces in different times of distress or in life. While still not completely understood and very much so just a theory, it's believed that the imprints of these archetypal faces are something that's inherited. It's a form of unconscious memory which was passed down from ancestors. So we can understand that as a theory. You know, it would explain the strange sense of familiarity that we all feel when looking at that face. But what are the origins of that? If we do have this sort of preset collective unconsciousness, why is it this face that fits into one of those archetypes that we all find to be familiar? This is True Crime by State. Today we are covering Arizona. I know everybody thought I was going to do Jody on this, and I will do a video on her story, but this story floored me. This is the story of Phoenix, Arizona man Scott Falater, otherwise known as the Sleepwalker. On the night of January 16th, 1997, a neighbor wakes up to the sounds of screaming coming from next door. He then witnesses Scott dragging his wife of 20 years as her body lay lifeless and bloodied, and then pushes her head under the water of the backyard pool. Police rush to the scene and pull her out of the water and find that she had been stabbed 44 times. They find Scott right up the stairs and arrest him in the house and then usher his children to safety. The initial story, when he kind of comes to, is that he was in a deep state of sleepwalking. Okay, so you hear that and the first thing you think is, this is bull, this is bull. But corroborating reports from his family and friends do indicate that he has a severe struggle with sleepwalking, and his defense actually goes on to argue this in court to plead for his innocence. Although the defense testimony is compelling, there is a witness that comes forward that says he saw him trying to calm down the family dog during the murder, which they believe can essentially prove that he was conscious and aware. He's served with a life sentence, but to this day, he maintains that he has no memory of the attack. Shockingly, this is not the first case of homicidal sleepwalking, which is terrifying, but this one in particular definitely stands out for the state. And truthfully, we'll never actually know whether or not he was or wasn't sleepwalking that night. Here are 3 of the most disturbing facial reconstructions and the chilling backstories behind them. But before we get started, I did make a YouTube channel for everybody who requested. If you want to subscribe, the link is right in the bio. Alright, let's get into it. Number 1. The Irondequoit Jane Doe. Found buried in a shallow grave in New York State, the manner of death was ruled as suspicious, but there were no signs of trauma found on her body. Once found, her remains were so badly decomposed that it's suspected she may have been buried there for up to 30 years before being uncovered. Number 2. The Philadelphia teen. Discovered to have been shot and possibly burned, his remains were found near the railroad tracks in Philadelphia in 1977, and he was the victim of a horrific homicide. To this day, he has never had any friends or family that have come forward to claim his identity, and he remains unknown. Number 3. The Swimsuit Boy. He is one of the only unidentified bodies to come from the Dean Coral serial killings. Discovered buried beneath the shed, among others, his remains were wearing a multicolored swimsuit, hence the name. And it's not at all that this is a bad reconstruction. It's actually unsettling to me because it's pretty good. When you're looking at it, it's almost like the eyes are looking right back at you. It's that realistic. But what makes it all that more eerie is that it's linked to a missing boy that no one has ever claimed. You've probably seen pictures like these online. Places that feel kind of oddly familiar or even nostalgic, but also feel uncomfortable. This is the phenomenon of liminal space. Liminal spaces are versions of spaces that we feel like we've been in before or that we've seen, but we can't really explain how. These are often spaces that we've kind of moved through in passing throughout our lives, like hallways and airports or even malls. But it becomes unnerving to see these spaces in a context other than how we know them, where they don't have furniture or they're dimly lit or there aren't people. Many people report that they often feel kind of dreamlike to look at, almost as if they shouldn't exist in this context. It's something that sits in the in-between of what's familiar and what's real, but also something that's not right. It's not entirely understood why these spaces evoke feelings of uneasiness, or why we may feel like we've almost been there before, making the mystery of liminal space just downright strange. Okay, if you know somebody who's experienced the horror of sleep paralysis, you need to tag or share this video with them. Every year, up to 8% of the population will experience the horrific phenomenon of sleep paralysis. You awaken, realizing that your body is unable to move, leaving you in the halfway point between sleep and awake. This is often accompanied by a series of disturbing hallucinations referred to as sleep paralysis demons. People often report the feelings of pressure or suffocation, or the sensation of being dragged out of their bed, or even sensing the presence of someone else in the room. Psychologists have often debated the mystery behind this experience and have very little long-term knowledge to determine what causes it. To work your way out of paralysis, it's suggested that you get a grip on your breath and reality and focus on small movements if possible. Although you are always safe during the experience, the direct stare into something standing in your room is often too terrifying to put into words. Warning, this is a story that will contain imagery that some people will find to be distressing. This is the horrifically dark history of the freak show. Freak shows were a performative convention that actually dates all the way back to the Middle Ages, but then they were revamped in the era of circus as traveling sideshows in the early 1800s. Sideshows typically made profit off the marvel of those who had extraordinary abilities or appearances, whereas freak shows specifically were exploiting and profiting off those who were born with physical disabilities or abnormalities, as the rest of society would reject them. But there was one act in particular that stood out: Grady Stiles. Grady was born with a rare condition known as ectrodactyly, which fused his fingers and toes and left him unable to walk. You would probably recognize his character, which was adapted and made very sexy by Evan Peters in American Horror Story. But the real-life story of Grady is so much darker. Because he was unable to walk, he had developed almost unnatural upper body strength, and that mixed with a short temper and a history of alcoholism, he became abusive and dangerous. In 1978, Grady shot and killed his eldest daughter's fiance on the eve of her wedding, but due to his disability, he was sent to house arrest over prison, where his abuse continued. By 1992, his wife had had enough and somehow convinced a 17-year-old who was a sideshow performer to conspire to kill Grady. Following his death, they were both caught and sentenced, leaving the story of the great Grady Stiles just as grim as when it started. What could be more terrifying than the thought of your own body setting itself on fire? For hundreds of years, this phenomenon has been the subject of scientific scrutiny as well as deep mystery: spontaneous human combustion. This is when the human body appears to ignite internally, a fire starting from within before the entire body becomes engulfed. This actually dates all the way back to the 1600s, and since then there have only ever been about 200 cases reported worldwide. In 1984, a scientific team was assembled led by Joe Nickel to investigate a number of these cases dating back to the 1800s. One of the unusual threads that was found between all of these cases was that with every body investigated, there seemed to be some trace of alcohol in the system. This gave way to the wick theory, suggesting that if alcohol was in the system and there was some kind of a chemical change that could ignite a fire, body fat could be used as an accelerant, making the mystery of this phenomenon one you should think about next time you're drinking. Here are 3 pictures with something dark lurking in the background. And if you're loving Creep Time and you want longer content, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel with the link in the bio. Number 1. With what kind of just looks like an overpacked truck at first, if you look a little bit closer, you might be horrified to find a small child in the back. Caught by a passing driver, all that can be seen is the head of a small boy crammed beneath a dresser. Number 2. When a wife had her camera roll developed, she thought she'd see pictures of her husband and her cat on the couch, but what she caught was horrifying. A smiling head beneath the end table. She confirmed in horror there was nothing she saw in that room after taking these pictures, leaving the face scene completely unexplainable. Number 3. During the attacks of 9/11, a picture was captured of what appears to be a woman standing at the impact zone. It's unknown how she could have survived the impact, or what appears to be her leaning up against scorching steel, making her final photo a mystery. Here are 3 of the most disturbing mugshots on the internet. Also, if you want more creep content, make sure that you follow and you can subscribe to my YouTube with the link in the bio. Number 1. On the evening of 1990, a woman named Marlene Warren opened her front door to find another woman standing there dressed head to toe as a clown. She was holding balloons and roses, so when Marlene went to reach for some, the woman pulled out a weapon, shot, and killed her. This was a cold case for like 27 years until finally being connected to a woman named Sheila, who was the husband's mistress through the late 80s. Clearly, she does not feel bad. Number 2. Provided from a Florida correctional facility, the nature of this woman's crimes were unclear, but her photo made an impact. Distressed hair with these wild eyes, it's very unsettling to stare at this shot for even more than a few seconds. Number 3. Coming in from Lakeport, Texas, this was a suspect who was apprehended following a break-in. When taken into custody, the station was kind of shocked as there's something very off about his features. Something unexplainable. Let me explain to you why this is a doll that you have to give verbal consent to see in person. You're also maybe wondering why her eyes are blocked out in these pictures. The doll was acquired by multiple curators over the last couple of decades, but it's unknown who the original owner was. What we do know is that the doll was sent away from its previous owner, and they claimed it to be the cause of severe hallucinations and said that it was moving on its own. Over the years, the doll has been subject to both historical and paranormal investigation, and there have been at least 80 documented cases of different spectators looking into its eyes and claiming experiences of nausea, headaches, chest pain, even lightheadedness. I've actually seen this doll in person in Nevada, and you do have to give consent before you go into the room. It's optional to look into her eyes, but they recommend that if you do, you greet her with hello and then finish with goodbye as a way of closure to the encounter. I am going to show you a photo without her eyes blocked, so feel free to stay, or you can scroll. On February 19th of 1994, 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez was rushed to a California emergency room. She was reportedly severely confused and experiencing heart palpitations, but the medical staff noticed something was wrong here. Her skin had a sheen to it like it was slicked with oil, and her mouth had an odor of fruit and garlic. They also noticed that when they drew her blood, it reeked of ammonia and had crystal-like particles in it. But then the unusual happened. One by one, the medical staff began to pass out around her. In total, there were 23 people who fell ill, so the ER was completely evacuated as it was believed, for an unknown reason, her body was toxic. Following her death shortly after, examiners autopsied her in hazmat suits, but were perplexed to find virtually nothing unusual in her system. There were unusually high levels of dimethylsulfone, but it's unclear what that may have contributed here. Although mostly attributed to mass hysteria, many believe there was something with her body that caused this. In 2014, two college students, one named Chris Kremers and the other Lisanne Froon, traveled to Panama. They were going to be put up by a host family and just do some volunteer teaching. About 2 weeks into their trip, they decided to go on a morning hike in the El Pianista rainforest, but never made it back. There is a massive search for these girls. The parents fly in, they hire investigators, but there is no trace of them for more than 2 months. That is until one of their backpacks was discovered near a riverbank 5 miles away. But not only was it completely dry, it was in perfect condition, almost like it was placed there. Not too long after, portions of the remains were found nearby, but only fragments of bones. Strangely, it was found that one of the feet of the girls had been cut off clean, right within the shoe, and there was evidence to support that they did not die at the same time. But what really chilled investigators was the analysis of the phones and the camera within the backpack. Data on their phones showed that over the course of 11 days in that rainforest, they had made 77 attempts to call for help. A probe into the digital camera showed that there were a series of 90 photos that were taken on the night of April 8th. This was 8 days after they went missing. The photos are they're kind of aimless. They're just kind of nonsensical, just of random landmarks and the rain at night. And then there was this photo, just of Chris Kremers' hair, and it's unknown if she was even alive in the picture. The mystery of their deaths is hauntingly unexplained, and what they really experienced in those 11 days we may never actually know. This is the story of the woman who walked in on her own funeral. In 2015, an Australian woman named Noella Racondo was coaxed over the phone by her husband into leaving her hotel room. But when she left, she was met with 2 men who kidnapped her and were hired to kill her. But almost immediately, the 2 men are starting to humanize her. They're asking her questions about her life. They're asking her why her husband put a hit on her. Somehow, she convinces them just to keep the money and to set her free. Meanwhile, days have already passed, and the husband's told everybody that she died in some tragic accident and he's going to be holding a funeral service. But she had details on that service. So following the funeral, everybody convenes over to the reception to continue mourning. That is until she walks through the front door. The entire room is stunned, and the husband was in such disbelief, he thought he was hallucinating. Everything comes out. He's arrested, he confesses, and the rare story of her revenge return is one that Australia remembers. We are looking at 3 pictures with something very dark lurking in the background. Number 1. So on the first night of moving into their new home, a wife just snapped a couple of pictures of her husband just relaxing on the couch right after they finished unpacking. But realized when these pictures were developed that what they caught was the outline of what seems to be a person standing in the dark of the kitchen right behind them. Number 2. Following the death of her mother in 1959, Mabel Chinnery went with her husband to take a few pictures of the new tombstone that had just been put on the plot. She ended up taking a few pictures of her husband while sitting in the car in the cemetery, but was horrified to find this, what appears to be a person sitting in the back seat. Number 3. So while the origins of this picture are kind of murky, it at face value just appears to be a girl just kind of sitting on her bed. But upon further inspection in the corner of the mattress, the face of a person can be seen hiding right below her. 3 of the most disturbing mugshots on the internet. Number 1. In 2011, Jared Loughner arrived at a Safeway where he was targeting U.S. Representative Gabrielle Giffords. Jared was a misogynist and did not believe women should hold positions of power, so he opens fire. She ended up surviving the attack, but there were 6 people killed in the process, and when he was finally apprehended, he showed no remorse as seen in this photo. Number 2. This is the booking photo of one of the scariest active gang members in California, Dion Milam. He was charged with murder but remained completely emotionless through the entirety of his trial, making this mugshot even more chilling. Number 3. There was virtually no public information I could find related to this photo, which most likely means that it was maybe substance-related or a non-violent offense. But the sort of vacant and unsettling nature of the photo leaves it haunting enough that I would consider this to be one of the more disturbing mugshots I have ever seen. On the morning of January 14th, 1989, something very unusual happened on a Chicago news station. WMAQ, which is an NBC affiliate, interrupted all of their morning programming and ran this photo, a missing woman named Joanna Lopez. But viewers noticed something very off about this photo. It's completely unrecognizable. It wouldn't make sense to run this to identify anybody. That's also not typically how missing person broadcasts are shown. There's usually descriptors like height or weight, not just a phone number. Home videos caught that this was actually broadcast again in 1991 for 10 seconds before it cut away to color bars. But what's really strange is that a probe into the public records of Chicago showed that there was no woman who was missing by this name. She exists in none of the archives of missing people in 1989 for Chicago, and there is no news record of her with NBC. So who was this missing woman, and why was WMAQ showing her on their broadcast?